maye sisebenti sami ubothatha leli thuba lingeke labuya futhi ubothatha leli thuba lingeke labuya futhi maye sisebenti sami maye sisebenti sami.
The understanding of his words and the comprehension of the utterances of the birds of heaven are in no wise dependent upon human learning. They depend solely upon purity of heart, chastity of soul, and freedom of spirit. This is evidenced by those who today, though without a single letter of the accepted standards of learning, are occupying the loftiest seats of knowledge, and the garden of their hearts is adorned through the showers of divine grace, with the roses of wisdom and the tulips of understanding. Well is it with the sincere in heart for their share of the light of a mighty day.
O Lord, thou art the remover of every anguish and the dispeller of every affliction. Thou art he who banisheth every sorrow and setteth free every slave, the redeemer of every soul. O Lord, grant deliverance through thy mercy, and reckon me among such servants of thine as have gained salvation.
All right. Thank you, readers. And at this time, if anyone would like to say any additional prayers, just remember to unmute yourself if you're muted and proceed.
Say a prayer for healing for my dear friend Pete Stein. He's still got a lot of burn care and surgeries to go through. Thy name is my healing, O my God, and remembrance of thee is my remedy. Nearness to thee is my hope, and love for thee is my companion. Thy mercy to me is my healing and my succor in both this world and in the world to come. Thou verily art the all-bountiful, the all-knowing, the all-wise.
I'll also say a prayer for healing for Nabil's father and for his neighbor and for generally for other people in need of healing as well. Praise be thou, O Lord my God. I implore thee by thy most great name, through which thou didst stir up thy servants and build up thy cities, by thy most excellent titles and thy most august attributes, to assist thy people to turn in the direction of thy manifold bounties, and set their faces towards the tabernacle of thy wisdom. Heal thou the sickness that have assailed the souls on every side, and have deterred them from directing their gaze towards the paradise that lieth in the shelter of thy shadowy name, which thou didst ordain to be the King of all names, to all who are in heaven and to all who are on earth. Potent art thou to do as pleaseth thee. In thy hands is the empire of all names. There is none other God but thee, the mighty, the wise. I am but a poor creature, O my Lord. I have clung to the hems of thy riches. I am sore sick. I have held fast the cord of thy healing. Deliver me from the ills that have encircled me, and wash me thoroughly from with the waters of with thy graciousness and mercy, and attire me with the raiment of wholesomeness through thy forgiveness and bounty. Fix then mine eyes upon thee, and rid me of all attachment to aught else except thyself. Aid me to do what thou desirest, and to fulfill what thou pleasest. Thou art truly the Lord of this life and of the next. Thou art in truth the ever forgiving, the most merciful.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. And thank you, Laura, for putting together the devotions program.
You're welcome.
Our wonderful facilitator for the past few weeks, Hotan, is traveling. She's in Arkansas, and so she asked me if I would facilitate the fireside today. So I'm very happy to do this. She has put together the materials as she has always wonderfully does or has been doing these past few weeks. And so I will share the screen here, and we can start reading through some of these talks that the master gave as he was traveling through North America in the year 1912. So let me share the screen here in just a quick. There we go. How's that going? I think I'm going to try and put this in presentation mode here. All right, there we go. And everyone see it as a full screen right now?
Yes.
Yes.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Okay. So, so this is going through, oh, and I tried to do something there. Okay. Going through, thinking about, reflecting on the journey of Abdul Baha in New York City, or in North America, but the particular talks we're going to be looking at right now, he gave while he was in New York City. But want to start off just, and we do have our YouTube stream going, and so for those who are, not entirely familiar with the Baha'i faith, throughout history, God has sent to humanity a series of divine educators. Baha'is refer to them as manifestations of God, whose teachings have provided basis for the advancement of civilization. And so such notable ones as Abraham, Krishna, Zoroaster, Moses, Buddha, Jesus Christ, and Muhammad. Baha'u'llah, the latest of these messengers, explained that the religions of the world come from the same source and are in essence successive chapters of one religion from God. Baha'is believe the crucial need facing humanity is to find a unifying vision of the future of society and of the nature and purpose of life. And such a vision unfolds in the writings of Baha'u'llah that we study. And so what do Baha'is believe? We believe that the manifestations have been as the coming of springtime in the world. For each spring is the time of a new creation. Baha'u'llah's revelation affirms that the purpose of our lives is to know God and to attain his presence. Our true identity is our rational soul, whose free will and powers of understanding enable us to continually better ourselves and our society. And that we have to do acts of devotion such as prayer, meditation, fasting, pilgrimage, and service to others, that these are inherent to religious life. We fulfill our highest purpose in life, or our highest purpose in a life of service, in which with humility and attachment, we offer our time, our energy, our knowledge, and financial resources. And the cultivation of spiritual qualities in this world is inseparable from an ongoing refinement of our conduct, in which our actions increasingly come to reflect the nobility and integrity with which every human being is endowed. So, in 1912, a person that Baha'is have called the master, but he himself referred to himself as Abdul Baha, which is an Arabic name or title, which means the servant of the glory. So he always saw himself as a servant, and he traveled. He was the son of the prophet founder of our faith, the son of Baha'u'llah. And while he himself is not considered a manifestation of God, he did as a follower of Baha'u'llah live the perfect life, an exemplary life that we, seek to model, our own lives and character after. He lived a life of service, and Abdul Baha, after his father's passing, was appointed to be the head of the faith, and a special title called the Center of the Covenant. Now, what's also interesting is that the passages on this map here, you'll see, all the places in North America that he visited in the year 1912, and it was traveled by ship that he had to conduct, starting in what is present day Israel. Back then it was Palestine, to Egypt, to Europe, and then from Europe, crossed the Atlantic Ocean, and then went across the whole continent, all the way to to California, to the West Coast. And so the particular talks that we're going to read over were delivered in New York City, where he gave many talks, and which he actually also has called the City of the Covenant. So let's see if I can get to this. Shows where he journeyed across North America. There's one city in Canada where he was as well. But we've seen this in the past. Now this here is a picture of the lobby of Hotel Ansonia, and why is this here is because this first talk we're going to talk about, or that we're going to read about, he delivered at that hotel back in April of 1912. I would like to ask for some people to read, and if we could maybe have people read one slide at a time, and then and let's read through the talk, and then let's discuss what that if there's any ideas or thoughts that come from it.
All right, I'll read the first one. Do you hear me?
Yes, thank you, Ajit.
Okay. Talking of senses. In Europe, I told philosophers and scientists of materialism that the criterion of the senses is not reliable. For instance, consider a mirror and images reflected in it. These images have no actual corporeal existence. Yet, if you had never seen a mirror, you would firmly insist and believe that they were real. The eye sees a mirage upon the desert as a lake of water, but there is no reality. As we stand upon the deck of a steamer, the shore appears to be moving, yet we know the land is stationary and we are moving. Reason. As to the second criteria, reason, this likewise is unreliable and not to be depended upon. This human world is an ocean of varying opinions. If reason is the perfect standard and criterion of knowledge, why are opinions at variance, and why do philosophers disagree so completely with each other? This is clear proof that human reason is not to be relied upon as an infallible criterion.
Thank you, Ajit. Do we get another person to read this slide?
Sure, I can read it. Traditions. When we consider the third criterion, traditions, upheld by theologians as the avenue and standard of knowledge, we find this source equally unreliable and unworthy of dependence. For religious traditions are the report and record of understanding and interpretation of the book. By what means has this understanding, this interpretation been reached? By the analysis of human reason. Inspiration. The fourth criterion I have named is inspiration, through which it is claimed the reality of knowledge is attainable. What is inspiration? It is the influx of the human heart. But what are satanic promptings which afflict mankind? They are the influx of the human heart also. How shall we differentiate between them? The question arises, how shall we know whether we are following inspiration from God or satanic promptings of the human soul?
Conclusion. Briefly, the point is that in the human material world of phenomena, these four are the only existing criteria or avenues of knowledge, and all of them are faulty and unreliable. What then remains? How shall we attain the reality of knowledge? By the breaths and promptings of the Holy Spirit, which is light and knowledge itself. So the human mind is quickened and fortified into true conclusions and perfect knowledge. This is conclusive argument showing that all available human criteria are erroneous and defective, but the divine standard of knowledge is infallible. Therefore, man is not justified in saying, I know because I perceive through my senses. or I know because it is proved through my faculty of reason, or I know because it is according to tradition and interpretation of the Holy Book, or I know because I am inspired. All human standards of judgment are faulty, finite.
All right. So, what thoughts do people have about this?
Well, I would say on the surface, it sounds like a very depressing epistemology. My academic background is actually in philosophy of science. And, I think it's interesting because some of the arguments that you make for, actually someone wrote a book fairly recently, which I haven't had a chance to read yet, that argues that science came about because of the refusal of not rationality, but reason. A lot of the philosophy before the modern period was believe that we can only know the truth through rationality. We have to reason to it. But reason divorced of empirical facts often leads us astray. Probably, because seemingly in hindsight, because we're missing a big piece of the puzzle, something we didn't know. And a lot of times, so empiricism is a safe harbor in the sense that you're always able to test what you believe you know against facts that present themselves in reality. But anybody who's seriously investigated or studied, science as an institution knows how, the history of science is littered with false beliefs that we one time believed were true empirical facts. Like when Aristotle thought that the earth was the center of the universe, he did it for completely rational and empirical reasons. If you were to do a little, like say, an ancient experiment, and you were to take a pail of muddy carbonated water and set it out, you would find that the gas would rise, right? The water would come to the surface and the earth would sink to the bottom. And if these are the four elements of the universe, then obviously all the earth of the universe would have to accumulate in the center because it would all be pulled down. So seemingly, empirically, that would justify this belief that the earth was the center of the universe. And of course, now we understand that that's probably not true, almost certainly not true. And so, it is, I think a lot of people would have a hard time accepting this though, because the alternative then is to turn to some religion, and the history of religion hasn't given us a lot of confidence to believe that truth comes through religious revelation.
Go ahead, Ajit.
I want to read this to you because this is what Baha'u'llah defines as true knowledge. It is incumbent upon thee by the permission of God to cleanse the eye of thine heart from the things of the world, that thou may realize the infinitude of divine knowledge and mayest behold truth so clearly that thou wilt need no proof to demonstrate its reality, nor any evidence to bear witness to his testimony. So this is Baha'u'llah's definition of certitude. In essence, he's saying it should come from within you, and you see it so clearly that you don't need proof. You don't need scientific proof. You don't need an assurance from somebody. You don't need a demonstration. It's just there in your heart and nothing changes it.
Thank you for that, Ajit. Ruzbe, you have your hand up.
Yeah. Well, I think in some ways we need to take this into context, in that I think there are other places where Abdu'l-Baha makes it clear that what distinguishes us from animals is our ability to reason and our ability to have, for lack of, again, a better word, scientific thought. I think what I perceive Abdu'l-Baha doing here is a couple of things. One is inviting us to examine things with humility, to be aware that whatever we identify as some things that we know should be viewed within the context as he's presenting them, as being imperfect for these reasons that he puts forth. And secondly, he basically is putting everybody at the same level. He's saying whether or not you're a scientist or a divine, a person that is uneducated, wherever you find yourself interpreting the world around you, however simple or complex you go through that process of interpretation, your knowledge or your resolution of what you're perceiving is not completely, fully accurate or whole. And so he sort of forces us to engage with what he's about to present to us, which is a new way of thinking, the classic Arabic word badi, of thinking and being through a objective lens of detaching ourselves from how we have perceived to know things in the past, which goes to the second hidden word of Baha'u'llah, to do things with justice, with your own eyes and not with the eyes of others.
Yeah. Laura?
Well, and I was thinking as well that, these methods that we use to gain knowledge or understand knowledge, I mean, they're the only ones we've got. And so, when, for example, when I became a Baha'i, I'm pretty sure it was through reason, but others may have become Baha'is or Christians or whatever through inspiration. So, we just have to understand that these are the tools that we have, and yet they're still flawed.
Yes, indeed. Anne, I don't know if you were trying to say something.
I was.
Go for it.
Yeah, I'm trying to eat and talk and listen. So, yeah, I think it's one of the things we need to, and we all know, is that what Baha'u'llah says, there's 70-some meanings for every word or something. So there's no one absolute, how do we take, and of course these aren't Baha'u'llah's writings, but to them, and these are ways that we have of finding. And I know I was listening to something that actually yesterday, I was traveling for about an hour's distance, and so I listened to a good part of some program on NPR, and it was on the brain, and it was on confirmation of what is confirmation and so forth. And is it really true that we become confirmed? We hear something, we get a response, and we think, oh, that confirms. And it made me think, because when I have to make big decisions, I have 3 prayers that are very extensive with 95 Ya Baha, La Bahas, and all these things. It takes quite a while to do it. But I go to Baha'u'llah before and I say, okay, this is what I'll do unless I feel confirmed otherwise. And it made me think, and I thought, okay, how many times do I do what I originally think? Where is the confirmation? Because I do truly believe in those prayers, and I use them for big things. I don't use them for minor things. So it's interesting of this whole, I don't know, how do we what are the meanings of the writings? How do we absorb the knowledge? You know, like Lara say, sometimes we'll go through inspiration, sometimes through reading the writings and our reason. Yeah, so it's interesting, but I don't think we can say it's this way or that way or one way and not another.
Yeah, I'm actually struck also by, well, Abdu'l-Baha gave a lot of talks also at churches. And so the fact this one was given at a hotel, I'm curious what the audience was as well, right? Because he's given talks in front of scientists and groups of people that, may not even believe in religion at all. So he may have, as others have stated, I don't see this as a rejection of human pursuit of knowledge, because in a lot of his other talks, he talks about that very, very highly. I think this is showing the limitations of that. And I've heard it say there's our quest or our striving to understand the world, which we do through, science and, and philosophy and reason and things like that and logic. And then there is God trying to teach us about the reality of life as well. And so trying to get, to put proper credence on, on each of them. It's important for us to, to develop our minds and to try and learn, but to ultimately know that, yeah, it's limited. We can be limited by our perceptions. As it was mentioned before, the most, highly regarded minds may at one point think, because they are, their view is limited by what is known at the time. And as more is known, you start realizing that, no, this isn't all that there is. There's more, around it and everything. So any other thoughts? Aaron?
Yeah, well, I think it's very important. I mean, science is the best we can do. And there's certainly don't want to, but just like, a couple of meetings ago, I brought up David Hoffman's conscious realism. And, if that turned out to be the case, and he claims to have a rigorous mathematical model, which it can be tested, then it just shows how much what we take, our naive understanding of our reality is false. Right. So that's the problem. It is a serious problem in philosophy. It's epistemology, what we can know. But I do think that what Abdu'l-Baha says here is true in any context, right? That the only standard of truth that we have is a revelation. But how do you convince other people of that, given all the interference and all the noise, like the history of past religions? I mean, if you're a skeptic, or if you've had a bad experience with religion, it's not something that I think one would be very sympathetic to hear. But the other thing I would say that Ajit brought up, in the presentation, we said that our true identity is our rational soul. But what is our rational soul? Baha'u'llah says that we'll never know what our soul is made of, just like we'll never know the essence of our own souls. And Robert Spira has an interesting exercise when he talks about awareness, and he says, are you aware? And you just take a moment to answer that question. So you pose your question to yourself, am I aware? And then the answer, of course, probably for all of us will undoubtedly, yes, I'm aware. That act of asking yourself if you're aware is an act of mind, and the act of answering is an act of mind. But that space in between is an act of simple awareness. And Abdu'l-Baha said, that meditation is communion with your own soul. He says it's an axiomatic fact, but he doesn't explain what that means.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially, I would put forth as someone who's practiced meditation for a good many decades, that it's the awareness, it's the expansion. There are different modalities of meditation to build up our focus and to do various things. But ultimately, the point that we're all trying to get to is that point of being in awareness itself. The subtle awareness of awareness and realizing that our identity is in our thoughts, our beliefs, our ideas, our emotions, that this is to some extent I don't know, false self. This is certainly the material that the insistent self is made of, but I don't know if it's a completely false self. I mean, Baha'u'llah certainly says that in the next life we'll have personalities and we'll have various things that distinguish us. But definitely our true identity, what we really are, is whatever awareness is. And awareness can never focus on itself. I mean, awareness always has to be awareness of something, right? So it's just experiential, but that's to Ajit's point. When you have an experience of yourself as the underlying ground of your own conscious experience, that's certitude with a capital C. And there's nothing that then any experience of thought or idea or argument or anything would be able to convince you that it's wrong. I mean, you simply have seen and experienced the truth of it for yourself as a matter of brute experiential fact.
And if I may add, Nabil, may I?
Please.
That when you feel you have gotten to that point, your knowledge, your scientific background, your attainments, etc., mean absolutely nothing. And on that plane of certitude, we are all the same. Your education doesn't matter, your family doesn't matter, nothing matters. On that plane, we're the same. And that's the point Baha'u'llah is making in defining what certitude is. That was not my definition, by the way. I was reading from Baha'u'llah. That on that plane, all these other four forms of attaining knowledge matter not. It is that you have the certitude. And I always tell this story about when somebody puts out a gun at your head and says, tell me you're a Baha'i or no. And you say, yes, I'm a Baha'i, shoot, I don't care. That's certitude. And that's really our, I know, it's challenging to think that way, but I do. That's certitude. By the way, I also want to tell you that there are certain Baha'i scientists that have written extensively about the Baha'i faith and science. And I'm saying this for you, Aaron. I would especially recommend.
I've read most of it, probably.
Stephen Freiberg, Stephen Phelps, William Hatcher. These are people that are very well-known scientists and have written extensively about the Baha'i faith and science. So,
it's very important. I mean, science has become, I think, a major modality of a lot of theology. It's based on my theology. But you know what's interesting? It's an illustration of all of this. When Thomas Aquinas had his own mystical experience. So to put this in perspective, Thomas Aquinas, there are 33 doctors of Catholic theology, right? And Thomas Aquinas is at the head of it. His theology is the groundwork that all modern Catholic theology, or all Catholic theology, is really basically supported on, right? When he had his own, and he died 3 months after this, so we don't really have a lot from him. But when he had his own mystical experience, he referred to all his previous intellect, and this goes to what Ajit was saying. He referred to all his previous work, this work that Catholic theologians look at today. He called it stable straw. In other words, the straw that you would feed horses, or the straw that would be, if you've ever cleaned out a stable, you know that it's filthy. It has the defecation of the horse, which itself has a lot of straw in it, and it's just muddy and it's dirty. He referred to all of his intellectual work of his whole life as stable straw,
Mm.
which shows you the value that even our it's the best we have is our intellectual products, is the best we have as humanity, but compared to the revelation of God, it's I think that's probably a very apt illustration. Stable straw.
Thank you. Rusbe, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't think we have many seekers online, or maybe we do. I don't know everybody online, but I think we should be cautious about how you the concept of knowledge and what we talk about when we're talking to the certitude or the object of the knowledge. So what I'm suggesting is that, one, in the short obligatory prayer, it is very clear that you were created to know and love God. And interestingly enough, knowing God comes before loving God. He doesn't say to come to love me and then to know me. He says to come to know me and to love me. So the implication is that knowing him is somehow a path to loving him. And if you believe that divine entity is everything, spiritual and creative, then everything that you are involved in that leads you to know is a means by you to come to know and then love God. So I think we should make sure that people recognize how important the concept of knowing and knowledge is, despite this statement by Abdullah, how these methods that we have so far are so faulty. The other thing is that I think the only object of knowing that you can acquire certitude in is the acceptance of a particular divine manifestation as a reflection of God. That's the only object that you can, with absolute certainty within yourself, acquire a knowledge of. I mean, everything else in science clearly changes, right? The way COVID has shown us anything is, as we begin to learn something, within a year, we have learned that scientists, as they begin to learn more and more, change guidances, change vaccinations, and we still don't know what things are going to end up. So there's very little that you can know that you should place full certitude in, because there's more knowledge to be gained. However, the only thing that you can within yourself find certitude in, whether or not Baha'u'llah is the manifestation of God for this stage, whether or not Jesus Christ is the Son of God in your belief system. And so again, I just want to make sure that we recognize the importance that knowledge has. We just have to find the boundaries that each of the ways of coming to know something have towards that knowledge.
Thank you. I appreciate that point.
I think also,
yes.
excuse me, just kind of one last thing is, I think also our understandings as we go through the faith, we are longer in the faith, Baha'u'llah's teachings have an effect on the world. We have a greater understanding and different understandings of even the writings, right? I mean, there are so many things that I look at now and I see them in a totally different perspective than I did back in 1968 when I became a Baha'i. Because of the condition of the world, because of what we have learned scientifically and everything. So it's not just science that changes. I think Baha'u'llah's teachings are constant, but our understanding of them, I think that's one reason why he says there's 70 some meanings to everything he's written, because as we grow in our understanding, we have a greater understanding, right?
Absolutely.
Different understandings.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. As you know, as we read the same thing, as you pointed out, years later, the way we understand things, absolutely change as well. So the next part of this journey is looking over Third Avenue, and if we this is again an old-timey picture, but now this is now a talk that the master gave in a home of Mr. and Mrs. Kinney. And so this the topic of this is the beauty of the Garden of Creation. So there's 4 slides to this, and I would ask for volunteers to read these 4 slides.
I'll go ahead and read the first one. The world has become a new world. The darkness of night, which has enveloped humanity, is passing. A new day has dawned. Divine susceptibilities and heavenly capacities are developing in human souls under the training of the Son of Truth. The capacities of souls are different. Their conditions are various. For example, certain minerals come from the stony regions of the earth. All are minerals. All are produced by the same sun, but one remains a stone, while another develops the capacity of a glittering gem or jewel. From one plot of land, tulips and hyacinths grow. From another, thorns and thistles. Each plot receives the bounty of the sunshine, but the capacity to receive it is not the same.
The bounties of the blessed perfection are infinite. We must endeavor to increase our capacity daily, to strengthen and enlarge our capabilities for receiving them, to become as perfect mirrors. The more polished and clean the mirror, the more effulgent is its reflection of the lights of the Sun of Truth. Be like a well-cultivated garden wherein the roses and variegated flowers of heaven are growing in fragrance and beauty. It is my hope that your hearts may become as ready ground, carefully tilled and prepared, upon which the divine showers of the bounties of the blessed perfection may descend, and the zephyrs of this divine springtime may blow with quickening breath. Then will the garden of your hearts bring forth its flowers of delightful fragrance to refresh the nostril of the heavenly gardener.
As difference in degree of capacity exists among human souls, as differences in capability is found, therefore individualities will differ one from another. But in reality, this is a reason for unity and not for discord and enmity. If the flowers of a garden were all of one color, the effect would be monotonous to the eye. But if the colors are variegated, it is most pleasing and wonderful. The difference in the adornment of color and capacity of reflection among the flowers gives the garden its beauty and charm.
Here are the last 2 words, but it gives us the garden its beauty and charm. Thank you, Rizbeh. We got one more slide.
If you attain to such a capacity of love and unity, the blessed perfection will shower infinite graces of the spiritual kingdom upon you, guide, protect, and preserve you under the shadow of his word, increase your happiness in this world, and uphold you through all difficulties. Therefore, it is my hope that day by day you will become more and more effulgent in the horizon of heaven. Advance nearer and nearer toward the kingdom of Abha. Attain greater and greater bounties of the blessed perfection. I am joyful, for I perceive the evidences of great love among you. I go to Chicago, and when I return, I hope that love will have become infinite. Then will it be an eternal joy to me and the friends in the Orient.
very beautiful. Would like to open it up for people to share their thoughts. So one thing that that does, kind of stand out here is, talking about how there are differences and that not, every person, but also every really created being is differentiated somehow. And that, even things that are made up of the same, essential materials or atoms can come out differently. This on the first slide, it talked about some remain a stone, some become gems. Made me think about how that process requires a fair amount of pressure as well. Things that are not considered to be maybe good, that end up creating the right conditions for something much different, and sometimes maybe more valuable or maybe more interesting to come from them. I think in the Fireside Friday night, the analogy was given of a piece of iron that is quite rigid and immovable until heat is applied, and then it becomes something that can be forged. Mm-hmm. And in fact also burns off, in fact, the the corrosion and oxidation, right?
We're really dealing with I mean, we're really hitting the most difficult things, and the most difficult intellectual things there are. The problem of truth, basically what philosophy is called epistemology, how we know what we know, and also the problem of evil, right? It's like that Rumi poem. I was saying that the Rumi talks about the carpet that needs to be beaten, so that we're carpets that need to be beaten to remove the soil, the dross from our hearts. I just thought, really, I mean, this may not sound like it's very deep, but these are actually the two most intractable problems that we know of. How we know things, and why is there suffering in the world?
Yeah.
I was thinking in this respect of the plants outside of my house and the winter freeze that we had recently. And the ones that seem to be flourishing and beautiful and so great and strong, they're not coming back from the test very well. And yet some of those that we don't think of as so great, it's not that they're ugly or anything, they're flourishing, and we just never know what is, because it is a test. And how do we succumb? How do we go through it? I think
and yet, I mean, that's a great analogy to give. And yet you're very happy to have had the very, flourishing, maybe more fragile beauty that was there when it was there, right? Mm-hmm. And so that has its own qualities as well. Mm-hmm. And then you have the hardier ones, and maybe the ones that weren't, out there, maybe blossoming, and leaves that that were thin and would succumb to cold. Now it's their time, but you have the fact that you have this diversity allows us to have beauty in all these conditions.
Yeah. Two random thoughts, Nabil. One is the creation of the pearl by the oyster. it is almost the probably for the oyster, the worst thing that can happen to it, that it gets piece of sand stuck in its body. And yet the result of that is maybe the oyster doesn't appreciate the pearls, but we human beings surely do. So that's one. The second is really, I keep going back to this notion of the Human Genome Project that has proven that substantially the human genes are identical, 95 to 98% identical when you look at any two human beings, regardless of where they are from. If, one from Australia and one from China, and the genetic makeup is approximately the same. In some sense, I believe that while Baha'u'llah talks about the oneness of mankind, and we as human beings have yet to come to that and acceptance of that idea, science is going a long way in proving that what Baha'u'llah says is true. I mean, literally, as Baha'is, we have to accept the idea of the oneness of mankind. And now science is coming around and saying what he said 170 years ago, we can now prove that genetically you are in fact one. To me, I find that thought very comforting. Laura, you're muted.
I find that comforting as well. But I remember in 1987, I think it was, there was an article in, it was Time or Newsweek or something talking about Eve. And that's the, woman in Africa that lived about 200,000 years ago that we're all related to. So yeah, that same thought struck me as, oh my gosh, Baha'u'llah is actually talking about a physical reality as well as a spiritual reality, which I found astounding. But I guess we did, there were other species. I mean, the Neanderthals died out and there were all other kind of human species, but not anymore. We're it. And so we're definitely all related. We're definitely one family in a physical reality as well as in a spiritual reality.
Thank you, Laura. Roosevelt, please go ahead.
Yeah, a couple of things. I mean, going back to what Ajit and Laura said, I mean, I think it's in the hidden words to wonder why we have created you all from the same dust, right? If you interpret that dust to be the genetic material, carbon or whatever you want to call it,
Thank you.
Constitutes life, all of us and human beings, and all that is created from that same dust. And then it becomes a subject of capacity, which I think is the purpose of Abdu'l-Baha's quote. And you have to keep in mind that, in my opinion, his quote has both a specific context and a more general context. In the specific context, when he came to the United States at that time, the faith was actually at risk. There was potential of people moving away from the faith. The person that founded the religion was beginning to act up, or helped to organize the religion. This kind of was beginning to act up. And so one of Abdu'l-Baha's purposes was to create unity in a community that was even then pretty diverse, from wealthy people to people that were servants to wealthy people to African Americans. And so he's trying to, in a specific way, create understanding that you're coming from different backgrounds and different capacities, but you should all recognize your unity in God, in Baha'u'llah. So that's the specifics of the time, but obviously the concept is general, right? Even I would propose that we, even in the city of Austin, when we were able to get together as a Baha'i community in the center, can be one of the most diverse collection of people gathering together in a confined space. If you were to take into account not only the nationalities, the races, but educational backgrounds, wealth, all those aspects, we are a very diverse community compared to, I think, many other groups of quote unquote communities. And I think what it's trying to convey here is that regardless of what your capacity is in income earning, your academic accomplishment, your standard or status in a community, when it comes to God, you need to view yourselves as a single community, as a single entity.
I brought this up before, and this really blew my mind. And it didn't seem to blow everyone else's mind the same way it blew my mind. But in the Gate of the Heart, I can't pronounce Nader's last name, or I won't try on the because I'll butcher it. I have a bit of dyslexia, but he makes the point that the core aspect of the Bab's theology was that everything, and the Bab said everything, not just human beings, but everything in creation has a dual station of divinity and a station of difference. And that station of divinity, it's going back to that conscious awareness. Conscious awareness, a metaphor of that is like space. Space is undifferentiable. Yet the space that exists in your kitchen is different than the space that exists in my office. We can put up walls around it and make the space kind of distinctive. But in truth, space is space. And awareness is awareness. And whatever our souls seem to be made out of, the experience of understanding what we are is undifferentiable. It's undifferentiable from a piece of from a quartz stone. And that's really, when you get your mind around that, that's the station of unity that brings, one of the core things about the Baha'i faith that really attracted me to its truth is the divine unity. When you understand the divine unity, you say it has to be. And the experience, of course, of realizing yourself, you realize, and that's connected to what Abdu'l-Baha said about love, because that awareness and love, there's an interrelationship between them. But it shouldn't surprise us that science confirms what Baha'u'llah said. One of the biggest maybe conflicts is how Baha'is have understood evolution and how science has understood evolution. But recently, the neo-Darwinianism has started to collapse. And now scientists are, biologists are coming closer and closer to understanding, or to talking about evolution in the same sense that Abdu'l-Baha would have argued is how we would understand evolution. So eventually, science, because science, when I say that science is imperfect, the thing is about science, because it's tested against reality, over the long term, it conforms to truth. Whatever politics there may be, and however science is imperfect in its actual mechanisms, because it has to be tested against reality, eventually our beliefs are beliefs that, so maybe our beliefs are never 100% correct, but as our beliefs come up with reality, we start to jettison aspects of our beliefs that are most not in sync with reality, and our beliefs become more and more in conformity with reality over time. And science is the #1 human institution that does that. But I would also argue that's what we should be. That's what should be happening to us during the length of our life.
And I think I agree with you. And I think Abdul Baha makes that point that, you know, in addition to science, I'm going to try and go back to here because I think this speaks to, I think, where you were going, Aaron. You know, he talks about what we have to do, right? We have to, you know, endeavor to increase our capacity, you know, strengthen and enlarge our capabilities for receiving them. You know, just like the ground or the soil is prepared and has different receptivity for, you know, what you're trying to plant there and the inputs. We have to get our work on ourselves and to be able to, you know, to receive and to understand and to refine our beliefs as we learn and we, you know, hopefully gain wisdom over time. And so coming to this sort of that, you know, his concluding remarks that we were reading on the fourth slide of this talk, you know, he's talking about love and unity and you know, saying I'm going to go for a bit and come back, and when I come back, I hope that our, you know, our love has become infinite. So that is, I think that's what we're always striving for, right? And that's what we're, you know, hoping to achieve as a community. Go ahead, Ajit.
I was going to suggest a book. It's called Human by Design by Greg Braden. Absolutely confirms what Mr. Searing was just saying, that the issues of how human beings have evolved are very murky right now. And Greg Braden writes about the fact that evolution and what Darwin said is proving to be it has not proven to be actually true. And the other thing I would recommend or suggest for everybody is Abdul Baha established to a Swiss scientist named Auguste Forel. It is a fairly long letter Abdul Baha wrote to Auguste Forel, Forel, and I would suggest that for those of you that are scientifically inclined, look at that and see what Abdul Baha has to say about that subject.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Ajit.
The one thing, Nabil, that is really important that I think that is that as Baha'is, we believe the purpose of physical reality, or purpose of our physical lives is to develop our souls. So this is kind of like the fire and brimstone aspect of the Baha'i faith, right? Because one thing that keeps me up, one thing that causes me a constant concern is that the development of our souls determine our futures in the life to come. And, you know, so I constantly worry if I'm doing enough, because I don't want to be the equivalent of a rock in the next life, you know, to be barely conscious in the spiritual world, that to barely have any capacity to exist in that world. And so, Alexa, stop. So I just, you know, that's an important thing, is that we believe that really we're put on earth so that we develop these spiritual qualities, and that the conditions of our next life, and that when this life ends, that ability to influence our next life ends as well. And that's the critical importance of convincing other people, hey, the revelation of Baha'u'llah says this, would you investigate it for yourself? Because there's no compulsion here for people to become Baha'is, accept Baha'u'llah's message. But what I would argue, though, is that we do passionately want people, especially people of goodwill, to investigate it for themselves, because the stakes are that this is the opportunity we have to determine our as individuals our future, as well as then collectively. I mean, there's an interesting, which I won't. I mean, this is too much of a tangent. The collective. It's not just about us, but in this aspect that I'm talking about, it is just about us. You know, if you really want to be the equivalent of someone in privilege in the next life, then and of course, I say that facetiously because the fact is we are all unified. What I just was speaking about was the divine unity, which is recognizing that on that level of the divine station, there's no distinction between us and anything, even in physical reality, much less spiritual reality. So this idea of privilege, of course, goes out the window. But I was making that as a joke for the fact that also there's a part of our personality that's motivated by self-interest. As I just claimed for myself, I don't want to end up in the next life lacking ability, and that ability is something that we develop now.
Right.
That's the claim.
And this concept of nearness to God, which is, you know, how we are told we, you know, sort of the life we live now determines our, you know, our closeness to God. Laura, go ahead, please.
Oh, I was just, you know, I think every person.
Sorry, your mic is going in and out.
Okay. How about now? Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yeah, now it's fine.
I think every religious person probably does worry about, you know, am I doing enough? And, you know, I don't want to go to the next life and be less than what I could have been. But it's so impossible to know what that means and, you know, where you're going to end up and all that kind of stuff. So this is just a little bit of comfort that I take from one of the hidden words, that when I get in that space of I'm not doing enough, Baha'u'llah says my, oh shoot, I just had it. Okay, help me out here. My eternity is my creation. I have created it for you. I'm pretty sure that's it. And so, seriously and partly in humor, you got a lot of time to keep going, Aaron.
Yeah.
You got eternity.
Oh, well, yeah.
Well, I think, you know, the important thing here, this is the thing that me and Laura have always been in conflict with for the 30 years knowing one another, is that you have a lot of time, but it is very clear that effort is required. I mean, this also goes back to the Kitabi Iran, and I think it perhaps is even in the hidden words, although I'm not sure if it's in the hidden words, but for sure it's in the Kitabi Iran that effort is needed. And the second thing is that, you know, again, Baha'u'llah being the consummate keeping you on your toes in the Kitabi Iran makes it you never know what your end is going to be. It doesn't matter how well you think that you have progressed spiritually. At the end, you might find yourself not where you expected. And conversely, you might be the most wretched human being in your own sight on this earth, or in the eyes of others as far as your status, and then find yourself to have been a spiritually enlightened individual at the last minute. So
Absolutely.
He sort of puts you in this situation of not knowing what your end is going to be, again, to make you humble regarding the process that you're going through.
I see Anne and I see Ajit's hand up, and I will take those comments, and then I'd like to close with a prayer.
Okay, two thoughts. And whose way are you? I don't know. you just led into what I wanted to. But the first was, a lot has been talked about science. And to me, there was a quote that really intrigued me. And the phrase was, I think, is, oh God. Anyway, the writings have something to do, it says, with the scientific method. Does anybody remember that phrase exactly? The holy writings, anyway, Abdu'l-Baha or Baha'u'llah one put that in there. And I took a course because that phrase always stuck in my mind, except for right now, right? On science and religion. And one of the things was, who Ajit mentioned, this Hatcher, wrote about the scientific method in science, and religion, and how that is. And I think that's the important thing about science, because science and what we learn changes, but it's the method that we use. And as we apply that method, and that can be applied to the writings, it can be applied to our lives, and so forth. But one of the things I find very missing are the stories of Abdu'l-Baha. You guys are intellects. I love stories. And stories have great meaning. So there was a story I was reading. I used it just not too long ago. I did a devotion on trusting God. And I used this story, and I read it. I came across it in the book on Abdu'l-Baha by Baha'is yesterday. And the story goes, and it's in New York City, so it's we're in the right city. We're in the right location for this story, if nothing else. This woman comes to Abdu'l-Baha, and she's just very weak and kind of shriveled up. This is a private interview with him. And he says, "Oh, don't grieve now," he says. And he was very still to listen to her. And she tells him that her brother is in prison for 3 years. He was imprisoned unjustly. The family is suffering greatly. He was really innocent, a victim of other people's and their thoughts. The family is suffering greatly. He has 4 more years to serve. Mother and father depressed. Her brother-in-law, who was supporting them, has just died. What are they supposed to do? They're under all these trials and tribulations. And Abdu'l-Baha says, you must trust in God. And she replies, "But the more I trust, the worse things become," she sobs. She says, "My mother reads the Psalms all the time. She does not deserve what she's getting. He's abandoned her. I read the Psalms myself. The 95th Psalm, especially, and the 23rd, I go to bed every night, I pray." And he says, to pray is not to read Psalms. To pray is to trust in God and to be submissive in all things to him. Be submissive, then things will change for you. Put your family in God's hands. Love God's will. Strong ships are not conquered by the sea, they ride the waves. So now, be a strong ship and not a battered one. And I guess in some ways, that kind of helps and says a lot of what we've been talking about, in some sense.
Thank you, Anne. That was beautiful.
Thank
Ajit,
you.
would you like to
Do I
share?
have time?
Yes.
Very quickly, friends, I would not need the Baha'i faith if I was perfect. I don't need a doctor if I'm not sick. I'm saying this for you, Roosevelt. Your business thrives only when you have a sick patient. In one sense, dear friends, we will not be perfect. We cannot be perfect. And we ought to stop looking at our own weaknesses and what we don't do well, and hope and pray that we're doing well enough that God's mercy and forgiveness kicks in for us. We have to trust in that. We cannot, will not ever be perfect. And we ought to not worry about our own perfections but we also ought to not think of perfection from other people, especially if you have young children. We ought not to demand perfection from them, but tell them, hey, you're good, you're fine, you'll do better. Encourage them in spite, because I see many of my friends whose children have said, I can't be a Baha'i, I can't be this perfect. And that is because so much expectations of perfection have been laid on them. We shouldn't lay those expectations on ourselves, nor should we lay those perfections on anybody else. I went to pilgrimage several years ago and I prayed for forgiveness for all my sins of the past. And then I went back and said, let me pray for all the sins I will commit in the future. I mean, literally, you have to accept the idea that you will make mistakes. That's part of being human too, making mistakes, doing wrong things.
And then having the capacity to forgive ourselves and
Yeah.
to encourage others. And it's good to keep that in mind. I really appreciate all these thoughts. I would like us to close by acknowledging that this is the 4th of July and it is, commemorating the birth of this nation. Abdul Baha revealed this prayer for America, and I would like for someone to read this. Do we have a volunteer?
Sure, I'll read it.
Oh, we got 2 volunteers. Okay, go ahead, Laura.
O thou kind Lord, this gathering is turning to thee. These hearts are radiant with thy love. These minds and spirits are exhilarated by the message of thy glad tidings. O God, let this American democracy become glorious in spiritual degrees, even as it has aspired to material degrees, and render this just government victorious. Confirm this revered nation to upraise the standard of the oneness of humanity, to promulgate the most great peace, to become thereby most glorious and praiseworthy among all the nations of the world. O God, this American nation is worthy of thy favors and is deserving of thy mercy. Make it precious and near to thee through thy bounty and bestowal.
Thank you,
friends.
Nabil, for leading